Hi, everyone. Am I unmuted? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alana McGovern-Register, and I'm the curator here at Silver Plume Exhibitions. Our company tours paleontological exhibits to museums and institutions across the country. And now we have the pleasure of offering our new Friday Spotlight webinar series. We focus on paleo artists and various paleontological discoveries. So if you'd like to see the programs that we have already produced or what might be coming up, please check our website, spexhibitions.com, and click on additional programming. Everything is free and open to the public. I hope you enjoy. So today we are very excited to be partnering with the National Aviary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you have never been there, it is one of the most amazing institutions and well worth a visit. And I will let Jennifer Torpy tell you a little bit more about the National Aviary and the program we have for you today.
Thanks, Alana. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jen Torpy. I'm the curator of education and public programs at the National Aviary. And I love working at the National Aviary because I get to work with a really dedicated team who are passionate about birds, passionate about animals, their care and their conservation. Because birds are incredible. At the National Aviary, we are home to more than 550 individual birds and mammals from over 150 different species. Birds are incredibly diverse. There's more than 10,000 species of them alive on Earth today, and they live in every continent and every habitat. And every different species is unique. But what I really could say, instead of 10,000 bird species, I could say there's 10,000 living dinosaur species, because birds are also the only living descendants of dinosaurs. All birds descended from small dinosaurs that survived the mass extinction event about 66 million years ago that wiped out the majority of their non-avian cousins. And paleontologists are able to tell us sort of how this process worked. How did dinosaurs become the birds we know and love today? Paleontologists uncover fossils and interpret the fossil record to help us ask big questions, like how did birds actually begin to fly? And I'm really excited that today we're joined by Dr. David Burnham from Kansas State University. He's a real-life paleontologist who's going to help us answer just this question. And it's not just this question, he's also going to be able to answer your questions. You can type in the Facebook comments or in the Zoom chats, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation. When Dr. David Burnham is finished, we'll have a Q&A session. I encourage you to ask any question. This is your opportunity to talk to a real-life paleontologist. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. David Burnham.
Hi, I'm David, and I'm from the University of Kansas Biodiversity Institute and Natural History Museum. So I'm going to share this talk with you about how primitive birds learn to fly. Let's see, get this going for you. Okay, here we go. Everybody sees that. Well, I'm David. I've always wanted to fly myself, but that never worked out. It seems like I had the same problem that primitive birds have, is that my muscles aren't strong enough. And so you don't have any way to achieve powered flight. So today I'm going to talk about how primitive birds had to go through a series of changes and mechanisms to be able to fly and go from gliding feathered dinosaurs to flapping modern birds. So let's start with flight itself. There are two kinds of flight. You have non-powered flight, where there's no thrust involved, and basically you're just using gravity and you're gliding. And so like this gentleman here that jumped off this tower in Spain a long time ago, that's what he's doing. He's trying to fly. He didn't kill himself, but he did break his back and was injured. Today, people actually wear wingsuits and jump off of bridges and mountains and things like that, but I guarantee you it has a high mortality rate, even with the advances in science we have today. The next kind of flight is powered flight, and that's when The object provides thrust. So you got a jet engine or you got flapping wings and you can kind of move yourself along and actually fly. So gliding flight. So gliding's evolved numerous times in the animal kingdom. And so we have flying fish. And one of the rules about being a glider is that your appendages that you're using to become airborne, they don't move, they're stationary. So its wings are stationary, they can't flap their wings, but they can wiggle their tails and provide some thrust. But once they're airborne, they're slowly gliding through the air, and some of them go pretty far. We also have flying frogs. They use a different strategy. So they have membranes between their toes that provide the surface area so they have lift and they can fly. So you just don't want to jump off a tree without having some kind of a parachute to soften your landing. Snakes actually can glide as well. Snakes can flatten their bodies and jump out of trees. Certain species of snakes can do this, and many insects as well. Mammals can glide. We have flying squirrels. They don't really fly, they glide, so they don't flappers. We have colugos, and this is a picture of a colugo here. Strategy is you have skin stretched between your limbs, and that provides the gliding surface, and they jump out of trees and go from tree to tree, and that's how to get around. Actually, what they don't want to do is land on the ground because then they can't locomote and life becomes really dangerous. In the fossil record, we have gliders. And so this is a primitive glider from Germany. It looks sort of like a modern Draco lizard that can also glide. Dracos, however, have this membrane attached to their arms right there. And so even though similar, they are just a little bit different. Now, powered flight, flapping flight. So the first animals we see flapping flight in are pterosaurs. You can see them in the background here. And again, they use the membrane technique. They can flap their wings. However, this part of the membrane there is their fourth finger. Their fourth finger elongates, and that's what attaches the membrane. Bats do it differently. So this is a picture of a fossil bat actually found in Wyoming. Here's the real fossil here. And this is a reconstruction. And instead of just using one finger, they use all the fingers and have the membrane stretched between them, and that provides the flapping, gliding flight surface, so to speak. But they can flap and they can glide. And so do modern bats. So this is a modern bat. And you can see, there's the fingers, you can see the ridges, and the membrane stretched between them. And they're actually pretty good flyers. They catch insects with those wings as well. So modern birds. This is a juvenile brown pelican. It's actually a photograph of one flying across the ocean. And so modern birds can not only power flight by flapping, they can also glide or soar. And that helps them save energy if they have to go long distances. One special thing that modern birds can do that primitive ones couldn't do is high flap. So you look at this picture of this bird of prey, and he can reach those arms all the way over across the top of his head and get a full wing beat in like that. Primitive birds, however, do not have the architecture in their shoulder sockets or the rest of their body to be able to do that function. So they were poor flappers, so to speak. So how did flight evolve? When did they start flying? How do we think it happened? Well, there was a naturalist named William Beebe that proposed flight went through a four-wing stage for birds. So he actually came up with this idea while he was on a ship and watching birds, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the things about science is serendipity and luck. And so what happens next, so this animal that he envisioned was the precursor to flight in birds. It's called tetrateryx, or four wings. So the stroke of luck that happened was China preserved these animals in these volcanic rocks that are feathered dinosaurs, and they both been described as dinosaurs and birds, but look, they got four wings. They actually have feathers attached to their hind legs as well as their front legs. So Beebe's strange idea seemed to actually be true. And you'll notice a few different things. Modern birds don't have long tails, but the long tails on these Microraptors actually were feathered. And Microraptors' feathers were pretty interesting because they were asymmetrical feathers. And asymmetrical feathers provide lift. And so we became interested in Microraptor, as other scientists were. And if you saw the videos that we posted, we were doing experiments. We actually built life models and tested them out on the campus at the University of Kansas. And so we tested the biplane version here, where the hind limbs are held parallel underneath the front wings. There's the X-wing version, and they actually did a show on that for Nova, a four-winged dinosaur. And here's, the problem is dinosaurs traditionally had their legs parasagittal. In other words, they were always upright, and nobody thought they could actually spread their legs like in this model here or that model there. But from our specimen that we looked at in Kansas, they actually were capable of some sprawling. So we tested these models and were able to actually fly them. This is one of our models, and we're out here in the tall grass prairie because we can build these models and they could fly, but the one thing they couldn't do that live animals can do, we couldn't land. Every landing was a crash landing. So we were constantly gluing our legs back on. But you can see the posture of this. It's not exactly spread eagled, but there's maybe 60 degrees that they could splay their hind limbs out from what we could tell. This is another picture of a Microraptor showing it in sort of a biplane posture. Well, Microraptor wasn't enough coming out of China. Now all of a sudden we have Anchiornis, and this is same area in China that Microraptor came from, but a little bit different, and it's more primitive, and it's actually older. This is about 160 million years ago, and these feathers are symmetrical, so they're not as good for lift as Microraptor's feathers were, but they were plenty good enough for gliding. So we feel these were pretty good gliders as well. And they could also rudimentarily flap their wings as well. And one thing to point out that these fossils that I'm talking about, Microraptor and Anchiornis, are preserved in volcanic rocks. And these are sediments that are around a bunch of lava lakes. So every few million years, these volcanoes would erupt and these animals would get killed by the volcanic gases and fumes and dust. And the ash was so fine that it actually preserved the feathers. And that's where we get all this information. We can measure the feathers, the width, the length. We can even, with high-tech instruments like an SEM, scanning electron microscope, look at the little tiny little organelles in the cells, and inside those cells are melanosomes, and they tell us color. So we know the color patterns on these fossil birds, and this has been called a dinosaur and a bird. And I'll leave that up to you to decide. So this is what the fossil of Anchiornis looks like, and I just wanted to show you that. So here's the head here and the body, and it's got a long tail as well. And then that black is actually the feathers. So they have sort of a different body shape than modern birds, but actually the basic parts that you need to fly are in place. For years and years, the most famous bird is Archaeopteryx, and it's from Germany. It was found 100 years ago or more, and it was really a beautiful discovery because it preserved the impressions of feathers and wings, alongside the bones in the rock, and I'll show you that in a minute. This is a nice painting showing what Archaeopteryx may have looked like. However, after the discoveries in China, scientists took a closer look and they found hind limb feathers. So there seems to be Beebe's idea coming back again. Archaeopteryx still had the bony tail. Archaeopteryx had teeth like those feathered dinosaurs had I just showed you. And you can see the wings are nicely preserved in the stone here as well. So now at least we got enough that we can start putting together a hypothesis of how flight might have evolved. It's called the trees down theory, and that's where we actually use gravity to assist us in flying. So the real primitive proto-birds lived in trees. They're small animals. And we see that in Microraptor and Anchiornis and some other animals we haven't talked about. And then they live in a forested area, so they basically want to get from tree to tree to eat. And so, first they do the thing like the frogs and the snakes is they flatten their bodies and try and parachute a little bit. But these dotted lines are the trajectory. And when you are jumping out of a tree and you don't have wings yet, your trajectory is very steep. So I like to call this phase, the leap of faith. It wasn't until they had wings that they could actually get some lift and go up, and then they go down and up and down until they got to a tree. This is the problem. We have a dinosaur, and this is one of those dromaeosaurs. It's a progenitor of birds in the group that gave rise to modern birds directly. And this is a modern bird. This is an owl. You can see they don't look exactly alike, even though you want to say, oh, dinosaurs are birds, this, and this. So some changes had to happen for them to be able to power flight. One of the big changes had to be in the skeleton. The next big change had to be in their muscles and their metabolism. So if you look at the arm or the wing, you'll see that the hand is really a lot longer, and all the bones in the hand have fused, and they've lost their claws. The lower arm is now longer than the upper arm. It's the opposite in these guys. And then the legs are different as well. In the legs, you can see their upper leg is held horizontal to the body, whereas in dinosaurs, remember we talked about that posture where they want to be parasagittal. They like to have their legs in this position. You can see the feet have changed. But what I'll point out, this is the breastbone. So birds have a breastbone, and that allows a huge attachment site for muscles. So that's swimmers, that's your pectoralis. And so birds, you ever have a chicken breast, that keel that goes down there, that's all for muscle attachment to give them all this power so they can flap and fly. And they also had a change in metabolism. So that modern birds have very high metabolism, much higher than primitive birds or dinosaurs. They also have a wishbone. Dinosaurs like Bambiraptor and Microraptor had wishbones, but the wishbones weren't springs like they were in a modern bird. So that was another change. So all these modifications had to take place and during the course of evolution. And also the shape of the wing had to change. I told you about the shapes of the feathers were different in the primitive birds. When we built our model, we couldn't use modern bird feathers because they were the wrong shape. So we had to trim feather by feather with scissors till they were the shape that matched Microraptor. And so Microraptor had much more narrower feathers. The structure that goes down the middle of the feather, called the rachis, it got stronger as evolution progressed. You can see the shape of the wings started off as a simple shape for gliders and became more complex as time went on. And even the tips of their wings, birds started getting slotted wing tips. And that's, I won't go into that, but that's another dimension of physics that helps them fly. And they have a fancy little thing on the front of their feather called the alula, which all these things are giving birds control. So when you fly, you want to be able to control your flight. Not because you want to launch, but because you want to land. And you ask any pilot, what's the hardest part about flying? It's the landing. You want to be able to land safely so you don't hurt yourself or anybody else. So I need to introduce a few terms to talk about what I found out in these birds and their flight. And it's just some basic physics, but we mentioned thrust. So thrust is a force going in the forward motion, and that's provided by the airplane engine pushing it forward. Well, the body of the airplane produces drag. So like if you stick your hand out the car window, you can feel the wind. But if you go like that, that's drag. So lift pulls you up, and that's because air is a very important part of flight. You have to have air. With air, you have air pressure. And then if you have the shape of your wing, you can actually get lift because the air above and below the wing go at different speeds. It starts pulling the airplane up. The same thing with the bird wing. But you're always constantly fighting against gravity. which is basically the weight of the object. So, like I said, myself and other men included, including Leonardo da Vinci, always wanted to fly. This is one of his flying machines. And even though it looks pretty fancy and everything, even with this apparatus where he could get in there and pump the pedals and ride it like a bicycle, he still didn't have enough muscle power to be able to fly. The Wright brothers. So we all know about the first flight. The Wright brothers imitated nature. They knew that they had to be able to control their flight. So before they built the motorized glider, they actually had a glider without a motor. And what they did was a very neat trick, is they had these strings attached to the wings that they could pull on these strings, and that would distort the shapes of the wings, which able control, so they could get where they're going, point direction, they could go up or down, left or right, and all these other things. Then they put a motor on it, then they had the first flight, the first airplane and everything. So we talked about these things, but basically the short story is the hind limb wings were training wheels. You lose those, the bones had to get stronger, arms longer. They had a pulley system developed in their skeleton for this flapping. The skeleton changed. They developed a new way of breathing. Birds have one air sacs, and they don't have breathing mechanism like we do. I talked about the keeled breastbone. They did other things. They lost their teeth. They did anything they could to lighten their load so they could be better flyers. And all these are modifications for control of the wing. And CG is just the center of gravity. The shape of their body changed the position, the center of gravity, which has a lot to do with flight. But I won't get into that now. But I'd like to show you this video. And come to find out, birds, besides flapping, they tilt their wings to direct lift vertically. So we talked about lift, that pulls you up. So these primitive birds with the rudimentary wings, they didn't have very much lift. And they had symmetrical feathers. So we think primitive birds extended their long jumps, and with partial wing beats, they inclined their wings to redirect drag to give you lift to support their weight so they could get to that next tree. So in this video, what I want you to pay attention to is they were able to prove this point by using modern birds as models. And as this bird flies from one perch to the other perch, you're going to see these arrows that are different colors. So the black arrow is the total net force. So the one you want to pay attention to is the lift, which will be the blue arrow, and the drag, which is the red arrow. And you can see at the point when the bird twists its wing, it actually gives it a momentary lift. And we think that is one of the key things that had to happen for birds to fly. So here we go. Birds repurpose the role of drag. Here we go. There you go. The green is gravity. And there you go. The lift. Drag provides up to half the body weight. And you saw that wing too. Now, they will do that same motion as an air brake when they go to land. Watch, they'll do that whole thing again, and they'll use that drag to stop them so they can land. And I'm sure primitive birds did this as well, because then when they land on that tree, they didn't want to slam into the tree. They wanted to break. And they were also able to do this because they had tail feathers too, and they were able to lift that tail feather up just before they land. There you go. There's the twist. There's the drag. There's the whole thing. So this is the next slide. This is Anchiornis. Every reconstruction I could find, they never show them flying. They only show them running on the ground. It's just really hard for paleontologists to put dinosaurs in the air for some reason. But you can see this is just a comparison again. We're looking at a primitive flyer versus a modern flyer and all the changes that had to happen. They're completely different body shapes and bone shapes and everything else. So I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in this research, my colleagues. There's some credits to Dr. Chen. She made the video and they did the research and confirmed the drag was providing lift, and all these other people, including I'd like to thank the Silver Plume Expeditions for having me in the National Aviary. And my predecessor, Larry Martin, who was very into dinosaurs and birds and their flight. So thank you very much. And I'd love to be able to entertain some of your questions.
That was great, Dr. Burnham. Thank you so much. I know that I learned a lot about how birds have evolved flight, and just like all good science, I'm sure that now we have more questions even than we did before. So if you have a question for Dr. Burnham, feel free to type it into the chat feature or into the comments, and we'll be reading some of your questions in a moment. But while you're thinking about your questions, I did just want to note that even though the majority of the dinosaurs did go extinct 66 million years ago, their avian descendants don't have to. The National Aviary is doing a lot of really great conservation work right now to help protect species and their natural habitats. You can learn more and donate to these conservation efforts to keep these living dinosaurs on our Earth. You can find the information at aviary.org, aviary.org. And while you're there, you can also check out our other virtual education programs. Just like this one, we're always trying to tell people all about birds and how amazing they are. So you can check out our SciBird distance learning programs at aviary.org. So the first question that we have is, how do you know dinosaurs had feathers at all?
Well, as from the fossils in China are incredible. They actually preserve the feathers in some of the real tissues. And in the specimens from Germany, we get the feather impressions. And there actually have been feather fossils found in Germany as well. So we do find them in the fossil record, and we can confirm that they had feathers. There's another technique, it's called phylogenetic bracketing. So if you had feathers and your descendants had feathers, so anybody in between had feathers as well. So feathers go all the way back possibly to pterosaurs. They're claiming now that the hair-like structures on pterosaurs are feathers. Pterosaurs aren't dinosaurs, they're actually a different branch, but they predate a lot of these things. So you got the ancestors and you got the descendants, and anything in between could have feathers. And that's why we're putting feathers on our dinosaurs.
Dave, Dr. Burnham, I was going to ask you a little bit of an expansion question on that. Is there a way that you can know if, even if the feathers weren't preserved in the surrounding rock, that maybe the bones had attachment points for feathers, or any other way that you can tell on the actual skeletons of dinosaurs that they
that's
had
a great
feathers?
point. On some modern birds, we see what we call quill knobs on the ulna, which is the lower arm, and these are the little bumps. When the feathers attach to the arm, they don't attach to the arm bone, they attach to little bits of cartilage, and they form little bumps that form a row going down the bone. We have found fossils that have these bumps too. And what's really cool, one of those fossils is Velociraptor. Another one is Ichthyornis, and these are both fossil birds. And then we also see it in giant flightless forms like Dakotaraptor. If you know anything about these giant raptors, they had feathers too. So yes, we can tell when specimens have feathers.
That's really cool. Some people are asking, why is it that some modern birds either hop or they walk on the ground and don't fly at all?
You know, birds do a lot of different things. There's a lot of different kinds of locomotion, and it all has to do with their ecology. So it depends on where they're living. I mean, if there are no trees around and all their food's on the ground, they're going to be hopping around on the ground. So that's probably the best answer I can give you for that.
I'll take the next question. So a lot of birds exhibit things like sexual dimorphism. Do you see any sexual dimorphism in dinosaurs? And can you figure out if a dinosaur is male or female?
You know, people have tried that for years, and it doesn't seem to be anything in the skeletons that seems to work. And but the one thing that does work, there is some work done previously on medullary bone. And so when birds get ready to lay eggs, birds, as you know, have hollow bones. So to lay eggs, they need extra calcium. So they store calcium in these hollow spaces when they're getting ready to lay eggs. So we think we found dinosaurs that have hollow bones as well, the theropods, that have this medullary bone, and then we can then say, well, at least we have a gravid female. And strangely enough, the dinosaur that I'm talking about has been T-Rex.
All right, we have another question, and maybe you can speak to this. I know you're familiar with Ken Dial's wing-assisted incline running study, where he had the birds go
Oh,
up
yeah.
at various different stages. He did the videos where they climbed the ladders and things like that. Can you speak to some of that and some of his findings?
Yeah, I was really excited to see those videos because he's got one called quadrupedal climbing, and it's actually a trees down theory because here's a bird using all four of its limbs to climb up a tree, and then he's going to fly. So it's just another form of the trees down origin of flight, in my opinion.
So someone's asking, when exactly could we say that birds started to fly?
Well, we can look at the fossils, and the oldest ones that could fly would be the ones from China, like Anchiornis. And I think those rocks are dated to about 161 million years ago. So flight was probably in place before then because we see it in other animals. You know.
Jen, do you see any other specific questions or?
Yep, one question just came in. So why would dinosaurs have feathers other than to fly?
Oh, there's been a lot of theories postulated for why dinosaurs have feathers. And one is for insulation to keep them warm. However, you must remember that in the Cretaceous, the time when the Bambiraptor, Microraptor, Velociraptor are all running around with feathers, was a lot warmer on the planet than it is now. So they may not have needed it for insulation. So that leaves the only other theory would be for display. And that's really an interesting one because, you work in an aviary, you probably see lots of display features on birds and activities. And what I think is really cool is that we see all these beautiful colors and birds doing different dances and ways to display, but bird eyes don't see what we see. They actually see more colors than we do, and they have this fluorescence that we can't see at all. So it's probably much more beautiful than we can even imagine.
That brings us to our next question. Someone asks, were dinosaur feathers different colors? And then to build on that, do we think then that dinosaurs had color vision if they were colorful?
Oh yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? So we know that Microraptor was iridescent black. And there's, I showed you the Anchiornis with the different colors that it had, and some other small little dinosaurs, compsognathids, like the little compy in Jurassic Park. There's forms that have been found in China, and those are kind of tan. I've been to China and looked at hundreds of these specimens. And when you look at them, you can actually see the patterns preserved in the rock as well, the light and dark bands. And then the scientists go in and they can take a little minuscule portion and see what color that band is. So yeah, so we can tell if we get that kind of preservation, we do have the tools necessary to be able to determine their colors.
We have another question. Do you know what bird is the closest relative to dinosaurs in terms of the living birds that we have today?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, there's been a few discoveries out recently. They found one in the Netherlands that is really closely related to ducks, but it's Cretaceous. It came from the chalks. We used to think that Paleognathes or the Ratites were the most primitive ones, and Paleognathe is just Latin for meaning ancient palate, and so they have their upper palate and their mouth actually looks like dinosaur palettes. So we really don't know exactly, but we know that the group that contained the raptors, that had the sickle claws, those seem to be the sister group to modern birds.
So one of our next questions is, were dinosaurs all big or were they all different sizes?
Oh, dinosaurs were all different sizes. There's tiny little ones, even smaller than Microraptor, like Massospondylus. A little, you could hold it in your hand, and then they, of course, they got so huge, like Brachiosaurus or Supersaurus. I mean, there's even they find larger ones. It seems like almost every few months. So yeah, they had range from every size you can imagine to actual giants. What's really interesting, what did the giant raptors do? I mean, they had feathers and they had wings because they had the quill knobs. I mean, so what are they doing with their feathers? Are they, using it to ambush prey, or is it just solely for display? And so there's a lot of interesting things with these new discoveries that we're starting to learn.
So we have a Jurassic Park question. Is it true that while they were working on the Jurassic Park movies, that it was found that dinosaurs are actually descendants of birds, or vice versa, birds are actually descendants of dinosaurs?
I'm not, I would think, they may have, whether the Steven Spielberg knew that or not, I don't know. But I know the funny thing about when they made the very first movie, the raptor they had, the velociraptor, was way too big. And they just wanted to make it giant just for Hollywood. And while they were doing that, somebody actually went out and found one of those giant raptors, Utah raptor. And so there you were, they were okay.
I guess you could kind of say that the dinosaur revolution was right around when that first Jurassic Park movie came out, and feathers weren't necessarily a big thing. How do you feel about the fact that they left them out of the future movies?
Well, there's some of their models that, when you watch those movies, those are the most realistic models you'll ever see. And we almost are looking at dinosaurs. They're really fun to watch. When you look at the old movies where they have the claymation and all these things, they're clunky and they're, lizard-like, lumbering around things. But, so they're able to really bring these things to life. And it's not, I allow a few discrepancies. And if you look at their raptors, they do have a wisp or two of something coming off their head that they say maybe are kind of giving us a feather here every now and then.
Someone asks how they can help birds that are becoming threatened or endangered. And I can actually take this one. There's a lot that we can do to help birds both in our backyard and around the world. If you're looking to help birds that are in your backyard, one of the best ways that you can do it is build a backyard habitat. All birds to survive need shelter, food, and water, just like people. So if you are able to put those things into your backyard by planting native plants or by putting in a birdhouse or a bird bath or bird feeders, those are really great ways that you can help the birds that are in your own backyard. It's a little bit harder when you're talking about birds that are not living very close to you. But one of the ways that you can support is by supporting your local zoos or supporting the National Aviary, who are actually working on the ground to protect a lot of those species. You can find information about the species that we are working to protect at aviary.org. But one of the species we're particularly excited about to work with is called the Guam rail. Guam rails were considered extinct in the wild for almost 30 years, but due to a lot of the breeding efforts and collaborative research that we've done with other zoos, we were actually able to successfully reintroduce Guam rail chicks or Guam rails back into their natural habitat through reintroduction, and we've actually been able to see them advance from extinct in the wild to critically endangered, which is a huge deal. So even though they're still a little bit in trouble, it's much better than extinct in the wild. So by supporting organizations who are doing the work you're passionate about, you're actually helping achieve a lot of those conservation goals that you share. So one additional question is, when were dinosaurs first discovered by people?
Oh, yeah, well, there's a little bit of history about that. I mean, the first dinosaurs, interestingly, came from England or the UK. And so there's a the very first dinosaur, iguanodon, may have actually, well, the first dinosaurs may have been found by Native Americans and things like this, but the first dinosaurs that actually were named and became scientific were from the UK. And so they had this country doctor named Mantell, and he'd go make house visits in the countryside. And while he was doing that, his wife would go out hiking. And she actually found a tooth, and she showed it to her husband, and it became what we now know as iguanodon. It was a supersized version, looked just like an iguana tooth that would be teeny tiny, but really, really large. They eventually found more bones. He got in there was another person, Sir Richard Owen, who was involved in paleontology in the 1860s, and he actually coined the term dinosaur back then. So Dinosauria, and so fearfully great lizards.
We have someone who's very interested in how different birds have evolved. Do we think that all birds descended from one ancestor, such as, diverse animals such as the emu and the hummingbird? Are they all from the same ancestor?
I'm not really sure I know the answer to that, but I know the way that when I look at evolution and when I work on raptors, and now I'm working on T-Rex, but evolution is more like a bush. It's a myriad of dead ends and branches that the only way we can trace them in the fossil record is by the shapes of their bones, whereas modern biologists are able to use DNA and they can actually trace it back. So until we can get DNA in every fossil and in every lineage, then we really don't know. But there have been studies that are kind of based on both now. So we're getting closer to the answer. And there's this scientist that was at the Carnegie Livesey, and he put together this huge volume that if you want to look it up, they show a lot of information on the relationships of modern bird species and brings them into theropods, actually.
So we have a question. Why did the dinosaurs go extinct? Would you like to speak a little bit to the extinction and maybe why the bird lineage of dinosaurs happened to survive?
Oh, wow, yeah. So that's a tough one. It's easy to make the dinosaurs go extinct because we found a hole in our planet in the Yucatan where an asteroid had struck. And so this asteroid came crashing down 66.25 million years ago, because we can get age dates on those rocks. So this thing slammed into the earth. It was maybe 7 to 10 miles across. It almost cracked the planet in half. It started earthquakes and tsunamis, a heat flash, a sound flash. And so basically anything that wasn't 3 feet underground or 3 feet underwater could have been within a 3,000-mile radius destroyed. The heat flash started forest fires that went around the globe. The earthquakes I'm talking about actually caused volcanoes to start erupting again. In India, we see a pulse in the amount of lava coming out of an area called the Deccan Traps. So it created havoc. And you realize when this thing hit, all this debris goes up in the air and then it comes raining back down. The whole planet is turning at the time, so it's raining across the whole planet. And these things are coming down like hot glass BBs. So these fires, we think, were global. And so it created dust and soot that probably, were detrimental to the foliage and to the animals that were living there. How long would it take if you put your house plant in the closet? It wouldn't be long before it died. So you don't really need a really long period. So we've actually have sites now, and one of them we're working does preserve the evidence of this cataclysm. We have an area where we have the little glass spirals that landed on the earth and punctured little holes, and some of them went into this river, and the fish were aspirating the water to breathe, and they were getting hot glass stuck in their gills and asphyxiating on it. So we're getting closer and closer to almost exactly what happened minute by minute after that asteroid struck. So the key was the fires for the survival of birds. So these fires, these primitive birds, the ones I've been talking about, so you have these dinosaur bird-like things. You have two kinds of primitive birds. You have backwards birds. They're called enantiornithines, and that's what it means, backwards bird. And then you got ornithorans, which give rise to modern birds. So the backwards birds lived in the trees. They lost their habitat, totally. They couldn't fly good. They couldn't get around, find more food. The other birds, though, they were shoreline birds. And so they, were able, perhaps because they were better flyers, or because maybe they ate seeds. Some of them we know did eat seeds. And so the seeds would have preserved longer than the foliage. And I think maybe nobody really knows this, but when did migration evolve? I mean, maybe these birds could migrate and go to a different place where they did have food, because we know some of the mammals survived, and some of the mammals that took over, were in refuges, and they repopulated areas. And so if you find a refuge, and you have a better chance of finding a refuge if you can fly rather than walk to it. So that's my opinion.
So someone is noting that they're seeing a lot of bird activity right now, and they're wondering why are birds seeming so active right now? And I think it's because right now is essentially nesting and breeding season. So we're seeing a lot of birds usually in the spring and early summer. This is when most birds are super active. They're out making their nests, they're looking for food for their chicks, and then their chicks are starting to fledge. So spring is always an exceptionally active season for most birds, especially local birds that we'd have around our homes. I'm pretty sure that this is happening every spring, and it's likely that we are taking a moment to slow down, and we're noticing it a little bit more because we're staying home and seeing this activity that we've really not had a time to pay attention to before. So that's probably why you're seeing so much activity around. We're just noticing how active birds are in the spring. Someone also wondered why birds eat seeds. That's a really good question. Birds can eat lots of different types of foods, and they have all adapted to eating the specific type of food. So birds have evolved into a certain ecological niche, or to access a certain resource that maybe other birds couldn't. So over time, they became specialists because that was the food that they had most access to. So birds can eat seeds, some birds eat fish, some birds just eat vegetation, and that's just because they've evolved over time and adapted to that ecological niche. Someone does ask, though, why don't crocodiles have feathers?
It's a good question. They are actually live in the water, so I don't really see why they need them. But archosaurs, pterosaurs, archosaurs too. That doesn't mean that they can't in that lineage.
Yeah.
So they're
That might
specialists like her, yeah.
that might be part of the question is, did other dinosaurs potentially have feathers even if they didn't use them for flight?
Potentially they could, but the jury's still out. We don't, it's just like putting feathers on a crocodile. Why would it need it? And then, look at T-Rex. Why do we put feathers on T-Rex? They find some of that dino fuzz on ancestors to T-Rex that are much, much older. But for the big Tyrannosaurus Rex that lived in North America, we really haven't found feathers associated with it. We have found scales. But if you look at whales and elephants, they're mammals. They should be covered in fur, but they're not. They don't need to be, So they have little tufts and whiskers and things that are hair. So, there's lots of little things that may be just because of their ecology or their niche, whether they need that or not.
So we have one final question. Someone's very curious about the physics of flight. Does air move faster over the top or bottom of the wing? And do you see the same pattern in some of the flight models that you are working with?
Yeah, we actually had another physicist on the group, that did that. And so he's got all the physics and everything. But I invite you to read our paper that we can post up there, and you could, take a better look at that and see the physics behind the flight of the Microraptor, which we determined. Part of the problem, we would think that the turbulence from the front wings would wash the back wings and there destroy any lift component in the back wings. So for an animal to be lift, the force has to be pushing up. So the differential has to result in that force vector going upwards.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Dr. David Burnham from Kansas State University for coming on and talking to us today about how birds evolved flight. This has been incredibly informative. I know I've learned a lot. If you're interested in other educational programming by the National Aviary, check out our website at aviary.org. We also post lots of behind the scenes videos of the amazing modern birds that we have living at the aviary, and our sloths and armadillos there as well on our Facebook page. So check it out. And I wanted to really thank Silver Plume Exhibitions for working with us today to put together this great presentation. So thank you so much, Alana.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks so much, Dr. Burnham, for going through all of that. It was really informative. And if anyone wants to see any more of our Silver Plume Exhibitions programming, please again visit our website, spexhibitions.com, for additional programming. And we'll hope to do more paleontological lectures and more stuff in the future. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so how many people did we have?
Hey, Charlie, I just promoted you to panelist. If you wanted to chat.